This is November 22nd, 1991. My name's Alan Harris, and have here Margaretta Harris. Margaretta Myrtle Green Harris is her full name. And we're going to talk about some things in the past, or the present, either one, to see what we can find out that she's never told us before, or things that she has told us before. And I'll just ask questions, and if you don't like the answer or don't like the question, I'll just go on to the next one. Where were you born?
I was born in Oak Park, Illinois, in the hospital. My parents were living in Maywood at that time.
And that was 1920.
Yes, 1920, November 16th.
And the names of your mother and father?
Well, my father was Fred Lafayette Green. My mother was Myrtle May Atherton Green. My father was born in 1875. I think he was born in Henry, Illinois. My mother was born in South Pawpaw, Illinois, which is near Earlville. Her birthday was March 23rd, 1887. My father's birthday was May 5th, 1875.
And what do you know about your family name?
I really don't know much about the Greens, or even when they came to this country. The Athertons came from England, I do understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they said there were several brothers, and no, maybe it was daughters. Somewhere along the way, someone said that there were no sons, and so the men, when they married these women, they took the wife's name of Atherton in order to carry it on. I don't remember who told me that.
What countries are your ancestors from?
Well, I remember when I was a child, and I used to ask my dad that, and he'd say I was English, Irish, and German. And
no Scotch?
There could have been, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But that was never mentioned. And I know my mother's ancestors came from England.
Do you know how you got your name? Your first name?
Yes. It was my great-grandmother's name. Her name was Margaretta Stewart.
Margaretta Stewart. Was that her married name or her maiden name?
I don't know. I think it was her maiden name.
Mm-hmm.
There's a picture of her out at Dale's, you know.
Oh, yeah. How do you feel about your name?
I've never cared for it. And I thought the combination of Margaretta and Myrtle was just too much. Either one alone wouldn't have been so bad, although I never really liked the name of Myrtle. But
you just don't like the way it sounds, is that it?
No, and I remember Uncle Frank Atherton, when I was a little kid, he always used to say, Margaretta Myrtle rode to town on a turtle. And that, I don't know whether that had anything to do with it, but somehow it always kind of turned me against that name, but it was just too much. Nobody else ever had a name like that. Mm-hmm. So they always shortened it to Margie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I remember Dad often would say Margaretta Myrtle Green Harris, you know, just to play on the length of the name.
Now, quite often, if I'm in sort of formal circumstances, I'll give my name as Margaret, just because it's easier to say and people don't look at me so funny, and it's too hard for them to call me by a nickname when they don't know me.
Yeah. Did you have a nickname?
Just Margie.
That's all, huh?
Yeah.
And what were your brothers and sisters' names?
Well, my brother was Frank Absalom Green. His middle name was for his grandfather Green. And my sister was Melba Adele Green Pendleton. Now, Frank was 8 years older than I was, and Melba is 6 years older than I am.
Do you have any early memories of your brother and sister?
Oh, yes, sure.
What can you mention some of those, like things that stand out?
Well, Frank was, I don't know, I think he was kind of a roughneck, like when he was a kid. But he was always quite protective of me. He and I got along well, but he and Melba used to quarrel a lot. And Melba and I did some, but not as bad as they did. But he used to take me, I remember once he made a little old cart that's made out of a big long plank, and he put like wagon wheels on it. And somehow he had I don't know whether it was a rope or a steering wheel fastened to the rope, something. Anyway, I remember him taking me for rides on that. And I think somewhere there's a snapshot of it, but I don't know where it is. And let's see. Melba and I used to play together a lot when we were, like when she was 12 and I was 6, and play dolls and that sort of thing. But it wasn't too long till she kind of grew up enough, so I was just kind of in her way all the time. And so then I played more with girlfriends. Mm-hmm.
You mean girlfriends of your age?
Yeah. Neighbor girls.
And they'd come over and play dolls with you?
Yeah. We used to do a lot of sewing with. We get little 10-cent dolls, celluloid, I guess. Usually they were, and scraps of material from my mother, and we'd make doll clothes. And we always had these boxes of the candy bars came in. We'd go to the grocery store, and then Mr. Meltzer, the man that ran the grocery store, would give them these boxes, and we'd keep all these scraps and the doll and our scissors and needle and thread in there, and then we'd go back and forth to each other's houses and sew for our dolls and play with them too, of course.
Didn't you tell me one time that there was some place that you would go for these chocolate soldiers or something like that? Something made out of
that
chocolate.
was Mr. Meltzer's.
Mr. Meltzer's?
Yeah, it was a neighborhood grocery. And every day when I was going to school in the lower grades, my dad would give me 2 pennies to spend at recess, to get candy for recess. And chocolate soldiers was always my favorite. But you get 2 for a penny.
2 soldiers for a penny?
Yeah. And then at recess time I could eat them. But didn't always get those. They had all kinds of little bits of candy and licorice whips and that sort of thing. But you could get quite a bit for a penny then. Yeah.
And you told me one time, I think, too, that you found some money once. Did you tell me you found a dollar bill or $2 or something on the street once?
Well, I did, but that was after I was grown.
Oh, that was when you were grown. I thought
after.
that was when you were a kid.
No, I think it was on the sidewalk, but it was in Peoria. I know at that time, though, $2 seemed like quite a bit, so I was kind of thrilled.
Did you ever have any projects or to do something with Aunt Melba that you two could work on together, or was it mostly that she was too old and you were too young to?
Oh, I don't remember any special projects. We did some things together.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I do, it wasn't a project, but I do remember on Saturday we used to always have to clean house. That was our job.
You and Aunt Melba?
Yeah, I had to do the dusting, and she had to do the sweeping, and so many of the neighbor kids didn't have to do that on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
But that was our job, and I always hated to waste my Saturdays cleaning.
Cleaning, yeah.
So, and she did too. So one day, we decided that we would get up real early the next morning, which we did. I think it was, I don't know, 5 or 5:30. It was still kind of dark, and we got up and did our house cleaning before anybody else in the family was up, so we'd have all day to play. And I know a lot of people thought we were kind of goofy. We never did that any other time, though. Just that once that I remember.
What can you tell me about your mother? What was she like what were her first memories of her, and do you have any things that you can remember about her?
Oh yeah, I can remember her pretty well. I was 12 years old when she died.
Yeah.
So, well, my dad always called her Murdy.
Murdy?
That was her nickname. And Uncle Frank Atherton, who was her brother, did too. And I guess they all did in the family. About the earliest I can remember is being on the train going from Peoria to Chicago. Because when I was a baby, I was born with a club foot,
Yeah.
And I had surgery on it when I was about 3. So I didn't start to walk till after that.
After 3 years old?
Yeah, after the surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And she had to take me up to Chicago every once in a while to see the doctor up there.
Oh.
And I can remember sitting on the train with her, and she would take along a Sears Roebuck or some mail-order catalog, and her little embroidery scissors, which are real tiny. And I would sit there and cut out paper dolls. Now when I think about it, those scissors were awful pointed. I don't think I would have thought about letting a kid use them.
Especially on a moving thing.
But I don't know if they even had those little blunt end scissors then, that they do now. But anyway, she was right there. And I remember sitting there cutting out paper dolls, and at one time there was a lady sitting, I guess, was behind us, and she was kind of talking to my mother, although she was just someone she met on the train. And I remember this lady had on a big hat that stuck way out all around her head. It must have made quite an impression on me. I think that's about the earliest I can remember of my mother, but I can remember her holding me and just, things that mothers do with children.
Yeah. How about your dad? Do you have any early memories of him?
Oh yes, he was always, ever since I can remember him, he was big, heavy. His hair was not quite all gray, the earliest I remember, but it was almost. I remember him. Oh, he was real jokey, jolly. Played with me a lot, with the other kids. Sing funny little songs and things like that. Although he couldn't really sing, he just kind of
said the words.
Yeah.
Did he make up songs and stuff?
Yeah, and poems.
Poems.
Little poems, and he'd make up poems about all the neighbor kids, and then say them when they'd walk by. If he was sitting on the porch.
Do you remember any of those poems?
No, I don't. Somewhere along the way there, in my stuff, there might be one of those poems that he wrote, but he used to work for a newspaper, actually for the Earlville Leader, years ago, and sometimes he would make up poetry for that, or anyway, he had to do some writing for the papers that he worked for, because he worked for a lot of different country newspapers.
So he wasn't just a typesetter and a...
Not... That was his main occupation, but he did write up some of the things too. He was a linotype operator. I guess that's what his job was.
Linotype, yeah.
He worked at different country newspapers. I guess he owned the paper at Cuba, Illinois.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, I think that's where they moved from Earlville. No, because they lived in Maywood when I was born, so they must have moved there from the Chicago area. But Frank and Melba were both born in Earlville.
Oh, they were.
Yeah.
Well, now, after you were born in Maywood, right, or Melrose Park?
Yeah.
Then.
No, I was. They were living in Maywood, and I was born in Oak Park.
Oak Park. Okay. After that, where did the family move to from there? Do you know?
I think that was when they moved to Cuba.
Oh, to Cuba. Okay.
Because I was 2 years old, they said.
Okay, so they lived in Earlville before you were born.
Yeah. Frank and Melba were born there, and then they moved up to the Chicago area. That's when he was working on the Sears Roebuck in their printing office, and they printed the catalog. And I think maybe they were living in Melrose Park, and then when that cyclone came and ruined their house and everything, I think that's when they moved to Maywood. And then I think from there they moved to Cuba. I guess I was still, I don't know, maybe a year or so old when they moved to Cuba. And apparently they didn't live there so very long, because I remember my mother saying I was 2 years old when they moved to Peoria.
So did the paper not do well, or do you know anything about
I don't know.
how that was?
I just don't know really about that. I was too young to remember. But I do remember them talking about some neighbors named Welch.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they came to see him in Peoria once. But I can't really remember them.
Do you remember any other neighbors that you had?
In Peoria, you mean? Or?
Well, in Peoria or anywhere else when you were young?
Well, when I was in Peoria, June Wallace was a good friend of mine. She was the same age as I was. She lived on North Madison, which was about a block from where we lived. We lived at 407 Homestead Street. That's where we lived.
In Peoria.
Yeah. And there were Woodruffs. There was Norma Woodruff was another friend. She was a couple of years younger, and she had a brother named Don. And we played together quite a bit. And then Woodruffs moved away, and then Bergs, the people named Berg, B-E-R-G, moved there. And there was Lillian Berg, and she and I were quite good friends, too. In fact, Lillian went with me to Earlville once. In the summer, I was going up there for a couple of weeks. And Uncle Al Oth was going to take us. I can't remember just why he took us. I think maybe Frank was busy or something. My dad didn't drive. By that time, my mother was dead. See, I was 12 or 13. And so my dad got Uncle Al to take us up. And he drove a Model T Ford. And it was kind of sputtered along, but we got there. And he was kind of a character anyway. And he liked to go up there and, I used to take his overalls along so he could help Uncle Frank Atherton in the field. And this Model T, why it was all open on the sides. It didn't have a roof. It was open, so you could put side curtains on if it rained. But it was a nice day, so Lillian and I sat in the back seat, and Uncle Frank had his overalls laying there on the seat, all folded up. And we saw them there. It seemed like it took about 4 hours to get from Peoria to Earlville. And anyway, when we got there, my Uncle Al went to get his overalls, and they were not there. And I think I saw me threw them out, but we didn't. Somehow or other, they must have gotten pushed aside and fell out. We don't know what happened to those. But he was kind of mad, I know that, and he had to do his farming in his regular clothes.
He still farmed, though, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was really kind of a character.
Is that the one they call Allie?
Yeah, Jesse called him Allie.
Oh, yeah.
We always just called him Uncle Al.
Could you tell us a few stories or memories about Aunt Jessie? Who she was and what she was like?
Well, she never was married.
She was Grandpa Fred Green's sister, right?
He's 6 years older than he was. And she used to stay with them a lot. I guess at the time of that cyclone that they went through in Melrose Park, she was living with them. Mm-hmm. She was supposedly there to help take care of Frank, because he was a baby at the time. But from the way they told about it, I don't think she was really too much help. She had never had any children of her own, and she had some kind of funny ways, although she was good. She tried to help. But she was always, since I could remember her, she was quite heavy set and had gray hair. It seemed like she always looked old. Just the same always. The time I was 5 years old until she died. I'm sure she aged, but she looked about the way you remember her, probably. Mm-hmm. You do remember her, don't you?
I remember going to visit her once or twice.
Yeah, but she'd come down to Peoria to see us, and she'd always have a great big handbag and always have presents in there.
Oh, presents for the kids?
Yeah, for the kids, usually little things. And she was really good, but some of her helping was sort of a hindrance.
Her motives were right, but she just didn't turn out.
She just didn't really know how.
Yeah.
To go about doing things. And after my mother died, she came down there to help, and she stayed with us for a couple of years. And I'm afraid those kids were kind of not as nice to her as we could have been. I mean,
did you make fun of her somehow? Or?
Oh no, not that. But she had some kind of funny little ways, old maidish ways that we didn't think that were necessary for us to do. And one just always be so ladylike and well, she just didn't approve of our modern way of living, I guess. Mm. And of course, what was modern then would be nothing now. But we used to get, I think, kind of cross with her sometimes. But she tried her best. Mm-hmm. She decided to go back to Henry, and when she said, "I'm just going to go back there where I have everything just the way I want it," and my dad would say, "Yes, and I don't know of anybody else on God's earth would want it the way you want it." But she had such a way of breaking things. I mean, she didn't know how to do things, and then she'd break things. Always dropping dishes and breaking them and cutting her fingers and burning herself. And she broke my dad's typewriter. I remember that. He had a desk that the typewriter, it opened up and the typewriter would come up. Mm-hmm. And then you put it down, and then she tried to close it when the carriage was over too far.
Oh, yeah.
And it wrecked it.
I bet he was mad.
Yeah, he was. We all got kind of impatient with poor old Aunt Jessie.
Were there any other relatives that would come and stay with you sometimes?
Well, Carl Engel came when I was fairly young, and he was about 21 years old. He was my mother's half-brother.
His mother and your mother's mother were the same person, right?
Yes, yeah. And he had just gotten grown up, and had been helping around farming in the Earlville area, and then he decided to go to Peoria and get a job, which he did. And I think he worked at what they called Avery's. And I can't remember what they made. It was some kind of a factory down there.
In Peoria?
Yeah. Uh-huh. And it was only a couple of blocks from where we lived. And so he came down and stayed through one winter with us. And then that following spring, he went back to Earlville to work on the farms. Mm-hmm. And then he and Louise Bauer got married.
Louise Bauer.
Yeah. Let's see. They came back to Peoria though. They rented a house up. Well, it's where Woodruffs had used to live, and that was before Bergs moved in. They rented that house, and they lived there for about 6 months while he was working, and then he went back. They went back to the Earlville area again in that following summer or spring. Let's see, their first baby was Margie Engel, and she was born in March. So they must have gone back pretty early, maybe a little before spring, because I know she was born in Earlville.
What was I going to ask you?
Well, I don't remember any other relatives coming and staying except for just a visit for.
Oh, I know. What was Carl Engel like? I never really knew him, I guess, and I didn't know what kind of personality and habits he had.
Well, I was only a little kid when he was there, but I think he was a pretty good fella. He, like any young man, though, I think he kind of liked to run around and not a whole lot, though. But I do remember he and my dad used to play pinochle about every night. He was pretty jolly, though. It seemed like he used to tease me sometimes in a good-natured way.
Yeah. Well, I know how jolly Margie Engel was.
Yeah. I think she was quite a bit like her dad, and well, her mother, too, really.
Yeah.
Louise was.
Yeah, Louise was full of fun. When you were in Peoria, did you always live in the same house?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we moved there. I guess it must have been 1922, and we moved out in, I think it was late 1935.
How did you feel about moving away from Peoria?
Oh, I was glad.
Oh, really?
I always liked Earlville. I always said I was going to live in Earlville when I grew up, and after Margie and Carl Marshall got married and they came down, well, my dad sold the house. Let's see. My mother had died a couple of years before that, and Frank and Melba were both grown. I guess I was 14, almost 15, and they came down and asked us if we'd like to come up and room and board with them near Earlville when they were living out in the country there.
Frank and Clara?
No, Margie and Carl.
Oh, Margie and Carl.
Oh. See, they were newly married, and I think they probably needed extra money, and Margie knew that I always liked it up there.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, we were living in an apartment down in Peoria at that time. See, my dad had sold the house, and I was, of course, wanted to come, and I think he went, well, he liked it up there, but I think he would have preferred staying in Peoria. He just went on account of me.
Uh-huh.
I know at the time he said he thought I needed to have a woman around rather than just him, because my mother was gone.
Yeah.
So that was when we moved, and I was thrilled. I really liked it.
And you were 14 at this time?
Yeah, I think it was about the 1st of October, and I had my 15th birthday in November.
Mm-hmm. So then you started going to Earlville High School, right?
Yeah.
I thought that you had gone to stay with Uncle Frank and Aunt Clara. Was that later?
It was later.
Oh.
Margie and Carl had Carol, or their baby Carol was born the following August, and I suggested that maybe it was going to be too much for her to have us there rooming and boarding with them, and I had to be taken to school every day, and somebody had to come get me because there was no school buses then. And my dad and I suggested maybe we should find some other place to live. And So my dad said, well, he kind of wanted to go back to Peoria, but I didn't really want to. And he said, well, if we could find a place in Earlville to room and board, why, he'd stay. And Aunt Clara had heard about a lady in Earlville that did take in roomers. And their name was Minard, Floyd Minard.
They were right in town?
They lived in that big, what we always called the old Hamill house there on Stilson Street.
Oh, yeah, and you were there for a while.
And
yeah.
So we moved in there. My dad, they had that big house. We each had our own room, and they had a daughter, Dorothy, that was, I think she was a year younger than I was, so we were good friends too. So we stayed there for a year, and then my dad decided he wanted to go back to Peoria. And so then I stayed with Aunt Clara and Uncle Frank when I was during my senior year.
Oh, just your senior year?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I went back there after you were born, stayed there for a while, after your dad and I were married. But I mean, while I was in school, it was just at Aunt Clara and Uncle Frank's during my senior year.
What can you remember about Aunt Clara and Uncle Frank? I know you can probably remember thousands of things, but anything really stand out? Things that they said or did, or habits that they had?
Well, of course, it was on the farm, and I can remember going there a lot when I was real young. We used to go up from Peoria for weekends pretty often. And I remember my mother saying it was 100 miles, and I thought that sounded like an awful long way. And it did take, I think, about 4 hours for us to go. That was after we got a car. I can't remember. I think maybe we went on the train before that sometimes, but not probably as often. But I think I was 6 years old when we got our first car. It was a gray. That was the name of it, the car.
G-R-E-Y?
G-R-A-Y.
G-R-A-Y?
Yeah. And my mother always did the driving. My dad didn't like to drive or thought he wasn't good enough at it, and she did fine, so he let her do the driving. And we'd drive up there for the weekend and usually stay. Well, it seemed like we went Saturday and came back Sunday. So we really didn't have too much time there, but I just liked it out there on the farm. I remember going out to the barn at the milking time and having them fill my glass with this real warm, foamy milk and drinking it. And Aunt Clara and all of them would say they didn't see how I could drink that stuff. But I thought it was wonderful, and that cream was so rich.
Yeah.
And
they squirted at the cats, too?
Yeah, they did. They squirted at the cats. Cats that sit up on their hind legs and open their mouths, and they squirted into the mouths. And they had a tire swing. We used to play on that, and they had a trapeze. At one time, somebody had given it to them. It was hanging from a tree. I remember getting up and doing acrobatics on that. And, they always have kittens and dogs, and Aunt Clara always had sugar cookies. And this great big, I think she said it was a lard can. It was just, it must have been about 18 inches high. I don't know. It was real big. And she always kept it in the pantry, and the first thing we'd get there, we'd all run to the pantry to see if she had any sugar cookies. And she usually did. Most always, in fact. And then when I got older, I stayed there in the summer, sometimes for a week or two, or maybe all summer. And I think I was about 7 the first time I stayed there by myself, But I just always liked to run around on the farm there and just play. That's really outstanding.
Was your mother born? She said she was born in South Pawpaw.
Yeah.
Was she born at that little intersection there where it says Atherton Acres now or something.
I don't think that was.
Well, wasn't it?
No, it was.
North,
there really was a community called South Paw.
Oh, there was a community?
Yeah.
Oh.
But it was such a little place, it wasn't really a town, I guess. There's a cemetery there. South Paw Cemetery.
How about Uncle Frank? What kind of things did he do when you would go to visit and stuff? Was he a kidder, or was he?
Yeah. Oh yeah, he was jolly. He was always going around making up funny little songs, and that was when he started this Margaretta Myrtle with Town on a Turtle stuff. And I can remember, probably the earliest I remember him was somebody. There was a white hat of some sort there with a turned down brim, like it was cloth, and he stuck that on his head, and he got down on his hands and knees, and I remember riding around on his back around the dining room table. And that was the earliest I can remember. But he was always full of fun, but he worked real hard too. He would go out and plow with the horses, and get up real early in the morning, and even after he was retired, he'd still get up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. But we'd always go to town on Wednesday and Saturday nights. That was kind of a ritual with the farmers. And they'd get groceries, and mostly just to visit, though, to see people. And when I was like high school age, or even a little older than younger than high school, why all the young kids would, the girls, anyway, not all of them, but there'd be different groups, I guess, but maybe 3 or 4 at a time, why they would walk through town. Usually start there at, do you know where Main Street is in Earlville?
Yeah.
Yeah. Start
we
at
lived
Main.
on it.
Yeah, well, it was in the downtown part, though, in the loop.
The loop, yeah.
Yeah. And we would start walking east there, and then we'd turn there at the corner, and then we go down that block. And
Ottawa Street.
Yeah, down Ottawa Street, and then cross over to, there used to be a restaurant there, and then the Lyrics Theater, right close to the corner. And then we walk north along there to Annie Giles's corner, and then we turn, we go kind of kitty corner, cross over to where the Gamble store used to be. You remember the Gamble store?
Where George Cole used to have his hardware
cross
store.
There.
Where
then
the
we
post
would
office
walk
was.
west down the street. And, for quite a while, there was Remick's ice cream parlor was there, but you probably don't remember that. I think they sold out before you came along. Sometimes we'd stop in Remick's and get ice cream sundaes or something, or a Coke, or whatever, and then go back across over to the other side of the street, not clear down the main street, but it was close, and then just keep walking. All evening we'd do that. Just
keep walking that circuit?
Yeah, keep walking that circuit and talking, visiting. Sometimes we'd meet boys to visit with along the way, because some of the boys would sort of do that too, though they weren't quite as faithful about it as the girls. So occasionally we'd go to a movie at the Lyric, and as I said, sometimes we'd stop at Remick's and get ice cream. And when we were younger, we liked to go to Annie Giles's.
Yeah.
Was she there any time when you?
Yeah, I remember Annie Giles.
Yeah. She was this old lady and her son Bobby.
Bobby, I can't remember.
Bobby Giles.
Yeah, I remember the name, but I don't know anything about him.
Well, it was just sort of a little variety store, and they had all kinds of little knickknacks and things that you could get for just a few pennies. And we used to go there a lot. But, let's see, we do that Wednesday night and Saturday night. And in between times, sometimes Aunt Clara would go to town to take the eggs in, because they had chickens, and they'd sell eggs, and when she got the egg crate full, she'd take it to town and exchange it for groceries. But usually it was in the evening when they went Wednesday and Saturday night.
How much would they give her for an egg crate or a crate of eggs?
I don't remember. I don't know. Not anywhere near what it would be now. I know that.
No, I know, but I just wondered, what she would get in exchange for. How about the price of admission at the Lyric? Do you remember what that was?
Well, I think maybe it was like 20 cents for an adult and a dime for children. But on Thursday nights, they got so they would have 10-cent night and everybody could get in for a dime.
How about your grandparents? Did you? It seems like you told me that only one of your grandparents was alive when you were born.
Yeah, that was Grandpa Atherton. His name was Bernard. Bernard Atherton. That was my mother's father. Yeah. Yeah, I think I was 6 years old. He was living in Kansas, Mays, Kansas, which wasn't, I think maybe it's not too far from Wichita. And he was farming down there. He used to, I guess, before he moved down there, he used to go down there to help with the harvest. And then later he did move down. And when I was 6, Melba said that my dad's brother, Uncle Bill, had died and left him a little bit of money, like $100 or something like that. And that was how they could afford it, to go on this trip. And we had a car that was a Rickenbacker. It was a big, kind of a touring car. And it had a big trunk that was fastened onto the back of it. And we took that in a tent and drove to Kansas. And this tent would fasten onto the side of the car. And then there was some cots, folding cots. And my mother and Dad and Frank all slept on the cots in the tent. And Melba slept on the floor in the back seat of the car, and I slept on the seat. And it took us 2 days to get there. I think it was a couple of nights that we camped that. I remember thinking that was quite an adventure. Yeah. And when we got to Mays, kind of remember my step-grandmother. Her name was Ada. They called her Addie, but her real name was Adda, which I thought was kind of unusual.
What was her last name?
I don't know. I guess I don't know what her maiden name was. Melba might know. But I remember getting there, and we ran down the road to meet Grandpa while he was coming. But he was just a real nice man. But I can't remember him being as jolly as Uncle Frank was, but he was quite a bit older then.
Was your mother kind of jolly like Uncle Frank sometimes, or was
sometimes? Yeah, but I don't think she was quite as much of a kidder as he was. Yeah.
She was a more serious person.
Well, I think I was about 9 when Grandpa Atherton died, and they brought him back to Earlville for burial.
Who would you say was your favorite relative? That's kind of a funny question. But...
Gee. Well, outside of my immediate family, I would say it was Aunt Clara and Uncle Frank.
Yeah. I remember how kind and cheerful Aunt Clara was. She always had a good word for people. And just really, really a nice old lady.
Yeah, I guess I always thought of her as kind of old, but she was pretty young, actually, when I first knew her.
Yeah, well, I mean, she was older when I
that's right.
first knew her. So, let's see. Did your family hit any snags, such as a loss of job, major accident, or illness? Well, I know your mother died when you were 12. or additional burden. How were those handled? Remember any other kinds of really crises that you went through?
Well, my dad was disabled on account of his leg, and he got so he couldn't work, so he retired from being a printer when I think I was in the 6th grade, about that, and so then but he got a pension
From the government, right?
He got a veteran's pension, and then he also got a pension from the printers union because for being disabled, and so we lived on that. And my mother, I think things were pretty hard though. It was during the Depression.
Yeah.
And my mother did housework for a while for people, just to help out. And well, it seemed like my dad always used a cane, or practically always, from the time I can remember him, because he was pretty crippled with that hip of his. And
it was his hip, not his knee.
no, it was his hip.